Welcome everybody to a new year, 2023, and the Quantum Analyst Roundtable, Season 2, Episode 3. We are back in full force. Everybody is at home. James is not in London. Shahin and Doug are enduring the rain. David and I were enjoying a sunny life in Miami and rainy life in the UK. How's everybody doing?
That's great. Happy New Year.
Beautiful. News did not take a vacation or a holiday. We have lots to discuss. We thought we'd start, as is good manner, with some of the predictions, and not making our own predictions. Many other people made predictions, and maybe we can look at that a little bit. Nonetheless, folks like Joe Fitzsimmons, a very interesting tweet, said that in 2023, the NISQ era of quantum computing will die. Good news is that he thinks a lot of progress will be made on fault tolerance quantum computing. He, very bold move, but he is based in Singapore, predicts a lot of trouble for PQC. Sounds like he is in the QKD camp. And he believes that we will get a much clearer understanding of quantum advantage 4 days into the year, and this January 10th, my understanding of quantum advantage has not changed, but I probably missed something. How do we feel about these predictions? Others added to that. Scott Arison is taking a sabbatical to focus on artificial intelligence. Many other big names made bold predictions. What are your thoughts?
I think there's a fine line between predictions and a wish list, and sometimes the ones that I read are more a wish list than a prediction. If they happen, of course, you look great and you nailed it, but I think they are ambitious targets. I don't expect NISQ to die anytime soon, even though you might have some existence proof of something that might someday become not NISQ.
Yeah, there's one area where I think I would agree with Joe, among others, but one thing I'm looking forward to seeing in 2023 is substantial progress on error correction codes. And there's been a number of papers of people who've shown some interesting things, maybe some minimal improvement in terms of the error correction codes, but none of the things we've seen so far is really ready for what I would call a production type environment or full fault tolerant computer. I think we may start seeing some much better results and some much better papers later this year on error correction codes that really will point the way that says, hey, this fault tolerance stuff is real.
I was just going to observe, as I understand where particularly some of the academic community that have done so much work developing full-scale fault-tolerant algorithms, why they're skeptical of NISQ, because it's not proven. But I also can, I sympathize with that. I also can put another hat on, which basically says I'm not really skeptical of heuristics per se. I mean, heuristics are an established thing in conventional computing. We use heuristic algorithms all the time. And so the basic notion that, well, we'll probably also have quantum heuristics is just very, very natural to me. I think it's another question then to say any of the heuristics that are currently in play, do we have an intuition that these specific ones might work? Well, that's more debatable in specific cases. And the limitations of the current devices, there's too much noise, we need better devices. But I think one really needs to keep open the mindset that, well, these heuristics might work.
As a founder of a quantum startup, you have to be a little bit loud when doing predictions. That's just kind of what comes with the territory. And not to put words in Joe's mouth, I want to say that for number 4, I would interpret that a bit more as a clear understanding of how quantum advantage is achieved, not an understanding of what quantum advantage is. And I will attribute the disparity in understanding to the character length limitations of a tweet. As it is, looking at the paper that Joe had linked, I suspect that there will be more of these types of things. This is the point that I would agree on probably most of the 4 that he had pointed out. In terms of progress on fault tolerance, this is something that we hear every year, and it's still more incremental than revolutionary, and I expect that to be the case through 2023 as well.
Can I come back and just add something, because there's a particular theme I'd expect us to start hearing more and more about, which is the importance of connectivity.
Yeah.
We're used to early architectures. It's great that they've done what they've done, but often qubit connectivity is a struggle. It's one of the features you're trying to add more of. And there's a connection here between some of the things Doug's talking about, new quantum error correcting codes. Often one of the things you want for those new codes is an enhanced level of connectivity. You look at where we're struggling to have algorithms that can demonstrate there really is a quantum advantage in a strict quantum supremacy sense. Often it's the connectivity that things are falling down on. Noisy circuit sampling struggles because we're really talking about noisy circuit sampling with local connectivity. It's notably Borealis's Gaussian boson sampling experiment. One of the reasons it gets over the line on that is it's got a non-local element to its connectivity. And so I think we'll hear more about the importance of connectivity, both in enabling error correcting codes and also in bringing to the fore which algorithms really do offer an advantage.
I think that's exactly right. And there are half a dozen different dimensions before you get past the NISQ era. And while there will be progress in every dimension, there are also sequential set of hurdles. When you want something, it exposes something else. It's kind of a bit of a whack-a-mole. And I think that is going to take its time. We could all get lucky, and I think that would be great if we do. And there are like half a dozen breakthroughs in 1 month. That's always possible, but I think it's not realistic to plan like that. So I think we're still a few years away. The conversations that I've been a part of, and you guys may have more than I, seem to indicate that we are probably 2-3 years away from a real application providing real competitive advantage. And even that application is going to be carefully selected. It'll be past the kernel. It'll be past what I called embarrassingly quantum when Sycamore did it. But it will still be carefully selected. It has to be a well-behaving application.
So predictions are inherently difficult to make in respect to those out there who keep track of them year over year. A few folks posted about that, which is nice to see. NISQ is not going to go away. We're not going to have fault tolerance next year. We're not going to have quantum advantage next, or rather this year. Something, and not my favorite topic, quantum winter, but Miami had its coldest temperature since 1977. So maybe we can put that topic back on the table. I'm certainly buying a winter coat right now, and not just because the challenges that we just discussed. Fault tolerance is still far away, that hasn't changed. Quantum advantage is still far away, that hasn't changed. We start to see companies running out of cash. Burn does exceed revenues, even so government grants have not relented. And we had a lot of conversations, both with vendors, but also with users, and many of them Fortune 500 users, that are really frustrated by kind of use case fatigue. So I start to get worried about a winter. Doug, you agree with me. You call it the quantum frostbite. But what are our thoughts? Frostbite, winter, or sunburn in 2020?
Well, let me first define what I meant by frostbite. There are a lot of companies in the quantum space, and basically what I'm saying is that some companies are going to have problems, big problems. Other companies are going to be able to go stay with it and stay through. And some of the things that make the difference are having government grants helps keep things steadier, because the government grants don't go up and down like a venture capital grant might do. Being able to continue to make progress and to show that your investors that you're hitting your milestones. Executing is really important, because you get Series A and you don't execute, you're not going to get a Series B. And the people who have gotten some rounds, one of the good things is once an investor is in, they don't want to totally lose their money, so they may give you another round just because they want to, keep their original investment there. So it might be a little bit tougher for a brand new startup who has no investors to get their first investor. then I may be someone who've already gotten a few rounds to get some sustaining funds.
David, we work with a lot of investors. Are investors having quantum winter frostbite
I think
sunburn?
it's important to remember the wider context here. I mean, the VC cap market overall is still in the middle of a slow motion car crash off the back of the tech crash, and that's nothing to do with quantum. That's everything to do with what's happened in the wider tech market and how that slowly makes its way through the much more opaque portfolios of the private capital markets. And that's still a process ongoing. And unfortunately, it's just come at the same time that quantum computing and quantum technology, like any other technology, is coming off the top of a hype cycle. And that's two negative biases playing into the market. Now, I still profoundly believe that the future is incredibly for quantum computing. I think it's a seminal technology, and I think that the wider quantum technology market actually gives an opportunity to access different time horizons of opportunity that flow through around that wider space. But yeah, I think there's a nasty chill wind blowing, and in my mind, it's really a question of whether we end up with a hard quantum winter as opposed to a seasonal rebound.
So in agreement with what Doug and David said, I do think that, and yourself, I think it is healthy to have quantum winter on the radar. I think we averted it in 2022, and it was great that we did, and we will continue to avert it, but not by ignoring it. And I think a lot of it comes down with expectation setting and having a balance of what I call enthusiasm and realism. Enthusiasm is euphemism for hype, and realism is euphemism for evidence of concrete progress. I think if we do that, I think we'll be fine. However, I also think, as Doug mentioned, that to the extent that there is a chill, it's not going to be uniformly distributed. It's going to hurt some people more than others. The space as a whole, as David mentioned, is guaranteed to continue to get a lot of attention because it has become of national, international, geopolitical, strategic importance. People who are spending money on this cannot afford not to. Regardless of how long it takes for it to happen, they must have a seat at the table just to make sure that if something does happen, they're able to react. I also think that this is a segue and a promoter of classical simulator and emulators, because when you do get use case fatigue, you want to run that application somewhere. And in the absence of quantum advantage, you could run it on GPUs, FPGAs. In the classical world, you don't have to worry about I/O, you don't have to worry about programming. A lot of that stuff becomes suddenly a lot easier, and you start getting some advantage out of it while you wait for the real thing to happen. But the real thing must happen for GPUs to have no hope of competing. Right now, they can compete quite well.
The foundations of geopolitics, pardon the phrase, and the government grants that go with it are likely to keep the lights on for a lot of quantum companies. But if we're looking at a quantum winter, I would start to expect consolidation given the current trajectory that this market and the tech market at large is at. Shahin, this is something that I think we play in a little bit more than the other three because we have more of a focus on HPC and frankly more you than me. But looking at the market for Matmul accelerators, anything AI, ML in silicon, that hasn't been going particularly well as a market. And I would expect to see a lot of consolidation on that front as well. I think we've already seen a tiny bit of it. I think there's one startup in Europe that has had to turn off the lights because of funding problems. So I do expect to see this. And as you see the different qubit modalities, I wouldn't say that there's going to be one or the other that's not going to make it through the year, but I would expect that there's going to be some consolidation in those approaches. I feel like we've talked about quantum winter a lot on this podcast, and I've probably said this before, so apologies in advance for repeating myself, but it does kind of come down to the truism of, if you want to go far, go together. And I think that's going to be the thing driving consolidation this year.
And after winter comes the spring and then summer. One announcement that is emblematic for me of it, just a few days old, is in Israel, and a new national effort there that put 115 million shekels against a quantum computing technology effort. And when I first read this historic announcement, I was a little taken aback, because that's just about 32, 33 million US dollars, which is not a lot, especially in quantum. However, it is the largest, single largest budget in the history of the Israeli Innovation Authority that funded it. And that to me describes where we're at nicely. Maybe it is not going to be easy, but together we'll get there, and people make historic moves. Also spoke earlier this week with the Qatari government, not about the World Cup. Germany got eliminated too early to make this noteworthy. But after football, they're now getting into quantum, and they'll be announcing a multi-million-dollar national quantum program. Rather small, but very well resourced and very ambitious across technologies and applications. And I expect we'll see more of that. I think Latin America has a few national announcements in the making as well. So quantum winter, quantum sunburn will probably end up somewhere in the middle, right, Doug? And excited about 2023.
I think it's really noteworthy the international scope of quantum computing. Whereas if you, for example, look at fusion energy, it's just not the kind of technology that a lot of different countries can do. And even the big ones have to create coalitions to go do. Quantum computing, almost any country can do. If you have a good, solid base of physics, quantum mechanics, mathematics, expertise, and those are all over the place. I mean, Israel is a powerhouse in technology anyway, but also their prowess in science and physics, and all of that is pretty well established. Likewise with India, likewise with with Southeast Asia, right? So the opportunity to pursue it is a lot more globally distributed than some of the other technologies.
Quantum democratization, and we're a big fan of it. There hasn't been too much company news over the new year. A couple announcements. One hot off the press this morning. Our friends at IonQ made an acquisition of Entangled Networks, and they say this now turns IonQ in a full stack quantum computing provider, also allowing them to open their 4th regional office in Canada, and securing a $13.5 million contract with the AFRL. Entangled Networks, David, I know you just mentioned them in our GQI quantum computing hardware outlook. Maybe you can give us a little bit of context.
Yeah, no, I think it's fascinating, this, because really there's two parts to what Entangled Networks have previously talked about. And one of those parts is expertise in networked quantum algorithms and networked quantum solutions, and you can see why that's an immediate fit for where you would want to go with an IonQ type architecture, where they absolutely want to have modules and scale up with interconnects. But one of the challenges for that that vision is, how do you get high enough performance interconnects? And that's something which is not in the bag for any of the architectures that we have on public display. And Entangled Networks have had that element. They have had a promise of improved interconnect performance as one of their promises. I remember them talking about it at least off canvas at Q2B in 2021. But that aspect doesn't seem to have been emphasized in the initial press releases we have around this deal. And I don't know whether that's just because the press release has been manufactured for a particular audience that maybe wouldn't understand that, or what we may or may not see coming out of that. So I can definitely see why there's a strong fit here for that software stack part of a distributed algorithm and distributed computing solution. But I'd love to hear more about whether there is really some secret sauce that the IonQ effort can put onto the table in terms of how the challenge of getting higher performant photonic interconnects in play.
Yeah, and I would say that I think actually their software may be as important as the hardware interconnect. This was a major challenge, 30 years ago when the classical computing industry went from the monolithic processors like the Crays to the network of computers. How do you get the software to work and be synchronized over, hundreds or dozens of computers was a big problem that required a lot of work. You have the same problem in quantum. And the thing to remember is that you'll have, if you do have an interconnect between, let's say, two different quantum processors, the speeds are probably going to be slower, and I'll call it the gate fidelities are going to be a lot worse. So you really want to minimize, using them as much as possible. Of course, you can't avoid it internally, but you're going to have a very interesting problem in terms of optimization and how do you place which qubits and which operations on processors. And I actually think the entangled networks may have more. Is really doing some unusual stuff there. I'm not sure too many other people have thought through that problems yet, but I believe they have been working on it. So that software piece, I think, is going to be very important.
The other thing this reminds me of is specialization, which was a trend that could be seen towards the end of last year, where instead of building a general purpose quantum computer and then wonder how you map algorithms to it, why not just pick an algorithm and go build hardware for it specifically? So if you then optimize the topology and the connectivity and all that to that particular kernel, then you might be able to really take advantage of quantum networking as well as quantum computing and kind of do a cluster. It may be a one-off, but you will learn a lot, and that particular kernel will do well.
And specialization or generalization, I'd love your opinion on that, Shahin, and James too, because you're both in HPC. IQM has done it in Europe. Xanadu has done it in other parts of the world. And by the way, Xanadu announced a partnership with the KIS, the Korea Institute of Science, yesterday. Very reputable organization to build a quantum computer in South Korea. But in Japan, Fujitsu announced together with the Riken Research Institute the first hybrid solution supposed to hit the market in 2025 of the Japanese largest supercomputer. I forget its name. And Fujitsu built a quantum computer co-located in a hybrid approach.
I really like what Fujitsu are doing with their classical simulator, digital annealer, as well as actual quantum system. They have a very comprehensive approach, it seems. Riken has a tremendously good reputation. Their supercomputer that you mentioned, Fugaku, was the #1 in the world for a long time, and it is. I have a general bias in favor of it, so I always wax, just glowing about it. And I think it's a beautiful machine physically, and the architecture is extremely. It's as general purpose as you can get in the spectrum of supercomputers that you can build. It does extremely well on very misbehaving applications, as well as really well on well-behaving applications. Whereas at the other end of the spectrum, you've got the supercomputers in China that seem a lot more narrow in the number of applications that they can do extremely well in. Now, the combination of the two have been working very well, building tremendous systems, and quantum computing is next in line. So the hybrid approach that they're building is really attractive. I think they're going to build towards real scientific applications. They usually traditionally optimize for actual results rather than kind of trying to push the envelope too hard. So what I expect that'll work well, but only in sort of a limited way.
I would echo that, in just to the extent that Riken is a very serious organization that is very image conscious about what it does. And so having them involved in quantum computing is relatively a stamp of endorsement. Outside of the HPC communities, I'm not sure how obvious that is. But going back to the idea of generalization versus specialization, I really do view the idea of having a quantum computer that does one thing as kind of a band-aid to the performance issue. I don't think it's a particularly good long-term strategy. And I think that I don't really want to use the word pigeonhole, but that's the only one that's coming to mind at the moment. One particular use case, as this is the way forward, this is how we're going to do a quantum startup, I think would be incredibly limiting. Even if you were successful in doing so, to kind of break out of that framework that you build for yourself, I really think would be incredibly limiting. I don't think it's a particularly good idea.
Switching gear, we talked about the critical quantum cybersecurity legislation proposed just before the vacation on our last episode. It was passed by Congress on the 20th or 21st of December, I believe. Of course, that is a welcome piece of news, and I'm going to mix it together with another piece of news, and I'll let you deal with untangling that, which is that ARKit announced that they are scrapping the efforts of bringing quantum encryption via satellite to humanity, and scrapped all of their efforts, not just of the quantum satellite program, but also all associated ground infrastructure. And of course, ARKit has been struggling with some overextension of their claims and a stock price that is less than enticing. Where are we at, guys?
Well, I would say that ARKit has always had the plan to do a ground-based approach first, using some unique algorithms, and then do satellite later. And I think as a simple matter is, if the ground-based stuff works, with their unique algorithms, why do you need satellites? Satellites are expensive, and if you don't need them, there's no reason to spend the money. So I think it's just a rational way of figuring out, their product strategy.
I can talk about the bill that was signed in Washington. And I usually raise the point that this is not a mandate yet, but it is definitely indication that the US government is starting to tighten the screws on how critical information must be protected, and being prepared for post-quantum encryption and such. Related to this is the notion of confidential computing that has been emerging. And that's the idea of having encryption in use, not just at rest and in transit. And that might mitigate some of the exposure. However, as we've discussed before, besides quantum key distribution and really good random numbers, cybersecurity with quantum really is what I call the on-quantum market, because you're trying to you're trying to defend against quantum computers rather than use them. So that's also important. But fundamentally, the handwriting is on the wall that the US government is going to give you a mandate one of these days, so you better be prepared.
Well, we'll see a lot of this in 2023, quantum winter, quantum sunburn, quantum frostbite. Some progress on one hand, some maybe step backs on the other. But as Doug pointed out, ARKit focusing on what they intentionally built and wanted to commercialize might in the end pay off for them. So let's look at some more tech on product news. And David, this one is for you. Get ready. I made the news, and I really only did nothing else other than citing Scott Arison, who said that this was the biggest hoax, he used a different word, that he had seen in 25 years. Of course, talking about the Chinese paper on factoring integers and the implications of that for our security posture and current encryption schemes, and making the argument that it actually wasn't the Shor algorithm, but a Shor algorithm. David, contain yourself. And really just a QAOA algorithm. But some disagree and think this was actually a very good paper with a very strong result. Go.
Yeah, let me take that. So I think a lot of people that have read my stuff, they'll say, "Oh yeah, David Shaw, that's the guy who excessively hero worships Scott Aaronson." And normally I'd say, no, that's not right, because Scott deserves that hero worship, and he's a great guy. On this, I do think his initial reaction to that paper was not really balanced. To describe it as the most misleading paper in 25 years is just not right. The paper clearly, the paper's it's not so long, it's got a fairly succinct couple of paragraphs conclusion, and the conclusion clearly says, oh, we don't really know if there's a quantum speed up here, and there's a real issue about whether QAOA converges when you scale it up. So it's clearly the press coverage ran right ahead of this, and you can absolutely see why this type of hype really riles people like Scott, riles a lot of people in the industry that trying not to let things get hyped out of proportion. But go back to the meat of this. We know that there are full-scale algorithms for FTQC that threaten current encryption schemes. And clearly it's a very sensitive issue about just when exactly we might bear the brunt of our current encryption schemes being broken. And it's one thing to say, oh, well, it'll take us this long to build an FTQC machine large enough, but you also have to worry about, might we break those algorithms with some heuristic that runs on more modest resources? And I think it's not reasonable to if you're asking what's the earliest date that we might face such a threat, I think you have to include that type of risk. Now, whether it's specifically, some of the Chinese paper, it seems to me to be a respectable academic group that have done an informative experiment. They've said that if you were trying to do it with QAOA and this latest classical algorithm, the Schnorr algorithm, this is the time, and that's informative. I feel informed by having read that. And I personally don't feel misled about how likely it's nowhere near we're going to be able to implement this soon. The current hardware is nowhere near that. We know that there's no guarantee that there's, what intuition do we have that QAOA really should converge for this problem instance? We don't really know. But there are other very interesting heuristics out there for this problem as well. Zapata have done work with variational factoring. Kipu, a very interesting German quantum startup, have got interesting new ideas about a combined analog digital scheme that can tackle these types of problems, or that might be able to tackle these types of problems. And I'm not really saying that, oh, I know one of these, I really feel that one of these schemes work. But it seems to me that there is a real possibility, and we shouldn't discount the possibility, that some heuristic on a device which is maybe a better performant device than we have in play at the moment may get over the line and be able to do this. And I really think that has to be part of our preparation for the threat to our current encryption schemes.
I think that's absolutely right and really well said. My view was that it's an algorithmic advance and contribution that is very valid. By the way, also, these things don't have to be right all the time, every time, for every try. The whole thing is becoming more and more probabilistic. So if they can crack one code out of 100, right there, that could be a very serious exposure that you might have to guard against. So the fact that they may not work every time may not really be that material at the end of the day. I thought it was really clever to look at a classical algorithm and say this part of it can be amenable to quantum advantage. This was not unlike quantum machine learning discussion we had a couple of episodes ago, where it was the same kind of an idea. Let's kind of use that and have this little kernel in the middle that can be moved to quantum. Now, I also thought it was nice that it was fewer qubits than one might have expected. So that was a good thing. And like David said, it's not like anybody said, look, this is guaranteed to work. So I think the hype was from those who read it and misinterpreted it rather than the paper itself. And I think if you get 100 emails like Scott probably got, is this serious? Should we worry about this? Is this right? So that can kind of cause you to really react to the folks who ask you that question rather than the paper itself. And then finally, I wanted to talk about China. So China has very notably not participating in the supercomputing world. On the HPC front, they've had allegedly 2, maybe 3 exascale, one with 18 zeros in front of it, floating point operations per second systems for the past 3-4 years, but they have not submitted them for the official ranking. So they've kind of gone quiet. So in this case, they were not quiet. They're actually participating. They're actually sharing. So a really valid question is, why now? Why this? Right? Why is it that this particular paper, and it was extremely well written too, the English, the language part of it. So why is this now being published where a bunch of other things that you're doing are not being published? So that's another question that we can discuss.
There was another thing I saw as an offshoot of this paper that I thought was very interesting. The actual processor that they ran the experiment on was created at Zhejiang University. Hope I said that right, which is a new effort that I was previously unaware of. And they put out an archive paper recently. We've referenced it in the quantum computing report that shows that I think the paper, the encryption paper, was on a 10 qubit processor, but they have a 68 qubit version of the same thing, which has very, very good specs with regard to qubit quality. You look at things like their single qubit fidelities and their 2 qubit fidelities, they're in the 99.9% type of range, and it's actually the best superconducting numbers that I've seen. They're better than IBM, they're better than Google, they're better than Rigetti. So it's something to watch out for, is that they're making a lot of progress on the superconducting processors.
I wanted to talk a bit about their photonic efforts, because it really speaks to that exact same point. The Chinese quantum program, one of its key strength pillars has always been the quantum photonics know-how that's particularly strong in China. And they had the great success with the Shahin experiments doing Gaussian boson sampling, and there's been a big question in my mind about what startups would we see coming out of those efforts. And there's been now 2 very noticeable academic spin-offs in China, and it's very instructive from my point of view. One Turing Q just outside Shanghai. And it's explicitly building on the lithium niobate photonics platform, thin film lithium niobate. They're having a whole new facility created in the area just outside Shanghai. The group that was responsible for the Zhejiang experiment, they've now spun out, and it's Zhejiang Quantum, and they've moved to Jinan in China. And I don't think we officially know what platform they plan to work in. But Jinan just happens to be where NanoLN are based, and NanoLN are the world's sole supplier of lithium niobate thin film wafers. So there's a strong suspicion there that they'll also be doing lithium. And I say this, it's become one of my hobby horses. We've seen groups in the West so far developing on other photonic platforms, such as silicon and insulator, PsiQuantum, silicon nitride, Xanadu. Thin film lithium niobate is a newer platform, but it's arguably the better platform for quantum technology. And it's very striking that you've got these 2 very knowledgeable, very credible Chinese-based groups now seemingly going to be developing on this very promising platform. And I think it has to grab attention.
Beautiful. China is certainly not a sleeping giant. Others are not sleeping either. We have to wrap up, but just to quickly mention, Oxford Ionics secured 30 million. Here too, a slightly new approach to commercializing electronically controlled trapped ion processors. I know David as well. David.
I mean, Chris will slap me in the face if I don't challenge you over slightly new. No, it's very. I love. There's lots of trapped ion approaches, and I can respect what different groups are doing, but it's not right to fail to recognize that what these different groups are. They're doing very different things, and that's great, because in that diversity, we've got a much greater chance of ultimately getting some architectures over the line.
Completely new, and we're excited to watch it. IBM, slightly new, but still awesome. The third generation of Eagle. It's called Sherbrooke with 127 qubits and improved error mitigation. We'll see how it does in real-world tests. And last tidbit, Pascal, but interesting because, of course, the trend to full stack is important, announcing their Pulsar Studio, a graphical user interface that hopefully allows you to make sense of their qubits. We shall see how that goes. Any final comments, Doug? I cut you short.
No, again, I think some incremental progress, and I think 2023 will be a very interesting year, and I'm looking forward to seeing what happens.
Sounds like a year where not only the temperatures and seasons might have issues agreeing with each other, but even our experts here, which shall make the roundtable even more entertaining and insightful. As James said, you have to walk this journey together. We thank you for walking it with us. This concludes the Analyst Quantum Roundtable, Season 2, Episode 3. Round and round we go.